Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had always been told she was too small for the military. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely meeting the weight requirements, she heard the whispers behind her back during basic training. The other recruits called her pocket soldier when they thought she couldn't hear. Even some of the drill sergeants seemed to doubt whether she belonged there. But Sarah had something that couldn't be measured in inches or pounds. She had fire in her belly and steel in her spine. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she learned early that size meant nothing if you had the heart of a lion. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, taught her that respect wasn't given, it was earned through actions, not appearance. The testing facility at Fort Bragg buzzed with nervous energy that Tuesday morning. 47 soldiers from different units had gathered for the Special Operations Selection Assessment. This wasn't just any test. This was the gateway to the most elite units in the military. The kind of assessment that broke seasoned warriors and sent them home questioning everything they thought they knew about themselves. Sarah adjusted her gear one final time, checking every strap and buckle. Her pack weighed 65 pounds, standard for the assessment. Around her, massive soldiers stretched and prepared. Most of them looked like they could bench press a small car. She caught several of them glancing her way, some with barely hidden amusement. "Look at that," whispered Sergeant Murphy, a tank of a man from the 82nd Airborne. "They're really letting anyone try out now." His buddies chuckled quietly, but Sarah pretended not to notice. She had learned long ago that the best response to doubt was simply to prove them wrong. The assessment coordinator, Major Williams, stepped forward with a clipboard. He was a legend in special operations circles, a man who had served in places that didn't officially exist and done things that would never appear in any report. His weathered face showed no emotion as he scanned the assembled candidates. "Listen up," Major Williams barked. "Today you will face 12 hours of continuous testing. Physical challenges, mental puzzles, leadership scenarios, and stress evaluations. Some of you think you know what you're capable of. You're wrong. This assessment will show you exactly where your limits really are." He paused, letting his words sink in. The pass rate for this assessment is typically around 15%. That means roughly 7 of you will still be standing at the end. The rest will learn something valuable about themselves, even if it's not what they wanted to hear. Sarah felt her heart racing, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement. This was what she had trained for her entire career. Every early morning run, every extra hour in the gym, every time she pushed herself beyond what seemed possible, it all led to this moment. "The first challenge starts in 10 minutes, Major Williams continued. "You'll begin with a 12-mile ruck march through the pine forests." Sounds simple enough. But you'll be carrying full gear, navigating by compass only, and you have exactly 3 hours to complete it. Fall behind the pace, take a wrong turn, or quit, and you're done. As the group began moving toward the starting point, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison observing from a distance. Harrison was the commanding officer of one of the most secretive units in the military. Word was that he personally selected every member of his team. Sarah had heard stories about his unit. They were the ones called when everything else had failed, when the mission was so critical and so dangerous that only the absolute best could handle it. Harrison's eyes swept over the candidates, and Sarah thought she saw them pause on her for just a moment. She couldn't read his expression, but she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Whatever he was thinking, she would show him that she belonged here. The march began at a brutal pace. The trail wound through dense forest, up steep hills, and across rocky terrain that seemed designed to destroy ankles and spirits in equal measure. Within the first hour, 3 candidates had already dropped out, citing injuries or equipment problems. Sarah maintained her position in the middle of the pack, focusing on steady breathing and efficient movement. By hour 2, the psychological pressure began to mount. The trail markers became harder to spot, forcing candidates to rely heavily on their compass skills. Sarah noticed several of the larger soldiers beginning to struggle with the sustained pace. Their impressive physiques, built for explosive power, weren't serving them well in this test of endurance and determination. She passed Murphy around mile 8. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed red despite the cool morning air. As she moved by him, he called out, "Slow down, pocket soldier. This isn't a sprint." Sarah didn't respond, but she increased her pace slightly. She had learned something important during her years in the military. When people try to limit you with their words, the best answer is to show them what you can really do. The final 4 miles tested everyone's resolve. The terrain became even more challenging, with steep climbs that left even the fittest soldiers gasping for air. Sarah's smaller size actually became an advantage here. She needed less oxygen and could navigate the narrow, rocky paths more easily than the bigger candidates. As she approached the finish line with 20 minutes to spare, Sarah saw Major Williams checking his stopwatch. Behind him, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stood with his arms crossed, still observing intently. Sarah crossed the line, checked in with the timekeeper, and immediately began preparing for whatever challenge came next. Only 23 candidates completed the march within the time limit. Murphy wasn't one of them. As he staggered in nearly an hour late, he avoided eye contact with Sarah. The pocket soldier had outperformed half the group, including several soldiers who had questioned her presence. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The real tests were still ahead, and she could see something in Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's expression that suggested he was particularly interested in seeing how she would handle what came next. The way he was studying her told her that this assessment was about more than just making the cut, it was about discovering who could handle the impossible. The next challenge was announced as a combat simulation, but Sarah suspected it would be unlike anything she had experienced before. As the remaining candidates gathered their gear and prepared for the next phase, she caught Harrison speaking quietly with Major Williams. Both men glanced in her direction, and Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and determination building inside her. Whatever they had planned, she was ready. She had spent her entire career proving that heart mattered more than height, that determination weighed more than muscle mass. Today would be no different, except that today the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. The sun was reaching its peak as they moved toward the next testing area, and Sarah could feel the eyes of the remaining candidates on her. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with curiosity about how this small woman had outpaced so many larger soldiers. But she kept her focus ahead, knowing that the real test of her abilities was still coming. In the distance, she could see a complex obstacle course that looked more like a battlefield than a training facility. This was where she would truly discover what she was made of, and where Lieutenant Colonel Harrison would decide if she had what it took to join the ranks of the most elite warriors in the world. The combat simulation area looked like a scene from a war zone. Abandoned vehicles, concrete barriers, and smoke machines created an environment that would challenge every skill the remaining 23 candidates possessed. Sarah studied the layout carefully, noting potential cover positions and movement routes. Her military intelligence training had taught her to read terrain like a map, finding advantages that others might miss. Major Williams gathered the group near a collection of wooden ammunition crates. This simulation will test your tactical thinking, marksmanship, and ability to work under extreme pressure. You'll be divided into teams of 4, except for one team that will have 3 members due to our current numbers. He gestured toward the course. Each team must complete 5 objectives within 40 minutes. Rescue a downed pilot, secure an intelligence package, neutralize enemy positions, establish a communication link, and extract safely to the rally point. You'll be using training ammunition, but the stress will be real. Sarah was assigned to the 3-person team along with Staff Sergeant Davis from the Rangers and Corporal Kim from the Marines. Both men were experienced combat veterans with impressive service records. Davis had 3 combat deployments, and Kim had earned a Bronze Star for valor in Afghanistan. On paper, their team looked like it might be at a disadvantage with fewer members. "Great," Davis muttered under his breath. "We're already down 1 person, and we get the smallest soldier in the group." Sarah heard the comment but chose not to respond. She had learned that actions spoke louder than arguments. Instead, she focused on studying their assigned sector of the course. While her teammates discussed firepower and assault tactics, she noticed something they had missed: a drainage tunnel that ran beneath the main obstacle area. "I have an idea about our approach," Sarah said quietly during their brief planning session. She pointed to a small opening partially hidden by vegetation. That drainage system connects to several points throughout the course. While enemy positions are watching for frontal assaults, we could move underneath and emerge at strategic locations. Davis looked skeptical. That tunnel looks barely big enough for you to fit through, let alone all of us. Exactly, Sarah replied. Which is why I can scout ahead and provide intelligence on enemy positions while you two create diversions. We use our size disadvantage as a tactical advantage. Kim studied the tunnel opening more carefully. It's risky. If you get stuck down there or run into trouble, we can't help you. Every option is risky, Sarah pointed out. But this approach uses each team member's strengths instead of trying to compete on the enemy's terms. The simulation began with the sharp blast of a whistle. Teams spread out across the course, most choosing direct assault tactics. Sarah could hear gunfire and shouting from multiple directions as the other groups engaged targets in conventional firefights. Her team moved differently. While Davis and Kim approached the first objective from the obvious route, drawing attention and simulated enemy fire, Sarah slipped into the drainage tunnel. The space was cramped and dark, requiring her to crawl on her hands and knees through several sections. Her smaller size allowed her to move relatively quickly through passages that would have been impossible for larger soldiers. Emerging near the downed pilot objective, Sarah found herself behind 3 instructors playing enemy forces. They were focused on the firefight with Davis and Kim, completely unaware of her presence. Using hand signals visible to her teammates, she coordinated a simultaneous assault that quickly overwhelmed the position. The intelligence package objective required scaling a 2-story building while under simulated sniper fire. Most teams attempted to storm the building directly, resulting in heavy casualties and time penalties. Sarah's team used the tunnel system again, allowing her to reach the building's foundation unseen. The real innovation came in how they approached the climb. Sarah's small frame and rock climbing experience made her ideal for scaling the exterior wall quickly. She reached the 2nd floor, secured the intelligence package, and rappelled down while her teammates provided cover fire from concealed positions they had reached through the tunnel network. By the time they reached the communication objective, other teams were struggling with ammunition shortages and mounting time pressure. Sarah's team had conserved resources by avoiding prolonged firefights, giving them a significant advantage for the final challenges. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had been following their progress closely, speaking into a radio headset as he observed their unconventional tactics. Sarah noticed him pointing out specific movements to Major Williams, though she couldn't hear their conversation over the sounds of the simulation. The communication objective required establishing contact with a command post while under heavy fire. The obvious approach was to fight through enemy positions to reach the radio equipment. But Sarah had spotted something during her tunnel reconnaissance, a maintenance ladder that led to an elevated position overlooking the target area. If I can get to that tower, she explained quickly, I'll have a clear view of the entire area and can direct your movements while you advance. The enemy positions are designed to stop ground assault, not overwatch from above. Davis had stopped questioning her ideas after seeing the results of her previous suggestions. Do it, he said simply. Sarah's climb up the maintenance ladder was exposed and dangerous, but her timing was perfect. The enemy instructors were focused on the approaching ground assault and didn't notice her ascent until she was already in position. From her elevated vantage point, she could see the entire tactical situation like a chessboard. Her radio guidance allowed Davis and Kim to move through dead spaces in the enemy coverage, avoiding several ambush positions that had eliminated other teams. They reached the communication equipment with minimal exposure to enemy fire and established contact with the command post ahead of schedule. The final extraction challenged every team's ability to work together under maximum stress. They had to move a simulated wounded soldier to the rally point while fighting through a series of enemy positions. Most teams chose to carry their casualty using conventional methods, resulting in slow movement and heavy losses. Sarah suggested using the tunnel system one final time, but for evacuation rather than infiltration. The drainage system connected to a point just 50 meters from the rally point, completely bypassing the heaviest enemy resistance. The plan required perfect coordination. Davis and Kim would create a massive diversion on the opposite side of the course, drawing all enemy attention away from the tunnel entrance. Sarah would guide the simulated casualty through the underground route while the instructors were distracted. As the simulation reached its climax, explosions and gunfire echoed across the course. Sarah helped the role-playing casualty through the tight underground passages, using her knowledge of the tunnel system to navigate in almost complete darkness. Her small size allowed her to assist the larger soldier through tight spaces that might have trapped a bigger team member. They emerged at the rally point just as Davis and Kim arrived from their diversionary assault. The entire extraction had taken less than half the allotted time, and they had accomplished it without a single team member being killed or wounded during the simulation. Major Williams checked his stopwatch and made notes on his clipboard. Around the course, other teams were still fighting their way toward objectives or had already been eliminated due to casualties or time limits. Sarah's three-person team had not only completed all objectives but had done so more efficiently than any other group. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached as they secured their equipment. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah noticed he was no longer taking notes or speaking into his radio. Instead, he was studying her directly, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Interesting approach, Lieutenant Martinez," he said finally. "You turned your team's apparent weakness into their greatest strength." Sarah stood at attention. "Thank you, sir. We used available resources and terrain to accomplish the mission objectives efficiently." Harrison nodded slowly. "Tell me, what made you notice the drainage system when other candidates missed it entirely?" "Sir, I grew up in an urban environment where you learn to see opportunities that others overlooked. Small spaces, alternative routes, unconventional thinking, they were survival skills before they were military tactics." The colonel's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been approval. "And you weren't concerned about the risks of operating alone in an unknown underground environment?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Sir, every option carried significant risks. I evaluated the probability of success for each approach and chose the one that maximized our team's capabilities while minimizing exposure to enemy fire." As other teams finished the simulation, or failed to complete it, Sarah noticed the pattern of Harrison's observations. He wasn't just evaluating physical capabilities or marksmanship skills. He was studying decision-making under pressure, innovative thinking, and the ability to adapt tactics to unusual circumstances. The day was far from over, but Sarah sensed that something important had shifted. The whispers about the pocket soldier had stopped. Her teammates were looking at her with genuine respect. And Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was watching her with the focus of someone who had found exactly what he was looking for. Whatever challenges remained in the assessment, Sarah knew she had proven something crucial about herself and her approach to solving problems. The question now was whether that would be enough to earn her a place among the elite warriors that Harrison commanded. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the remaining 18 candidates gathered for the psychological evaluation phase. 3 teams had been eliminated during the combat simulation, unable to complete their objectives within the time limit. Sarah noticed that several of the soldiers who had questioned her presence earlier were no longer part of the group. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the military psychologist conducting this portion of the assessment, had a reputation for breaking even the strongest minds. She had developed techniques that could reveal a person's true character under extreme stress, methods that went far beyond standard psychological testing. "The next phase will challenge your mental resilience in ways you haven't experienced," Dr. Chen announced. "You'll face scenarios designed to test your decision-making when there are no good options, your leadership when everything goes wrong, and your integrity when no one is watching." She gestured toward a series of small buildings that looked like a mock village. "Each candidate will face individual challenges. Some will involve moral dilemmas with no clear right answer. Others will test your ability to function when exhausted, confused, and under extreme pressure. The scenarios are designed to reveal who you really are when everything else is stripped away." Sarah was assigned to Building C, a structure that looked like a small office complex. As she entered, she found herself in a dimly lit room with multiple computer screens and a desk covered with documents. The setup reminded her of an intelligence analysis station, but something felt wrong about the entire environment. A voice spoke through speakers hidden somewhere in the room. "Lieutenant Martinez, you are now a military intelligence officer working in a classified facility. Your mission is to analyze intercepted communications and identify potential threats to American forces overseas. Sarah sat at the desk and began examining the documents. They appeared to be genuine intelligence reports, communication transcripts, and threat assessments. But, as she studied them more carefully, she noticed inconsistencies that suggested some of the information might be fabricated or misleading. You have 30 minutes to prepare a briefing for your commanding officer, the voice continued. Lives depend on the accuracy of your analysis. But, be aware that some of your source materials may contain false information deliberately placed to test your analytical skills. The challenge was more complex than it initially appeared. Sarah had to determine which information was reliable while working under severe time pressure. Making the wrong call could result in American soldiers walking into an ambush, but being too cautious might mean missing a real threat. As she worked through the documents, Sarah realized this wasn't just about intelligence analysis. The test was evaluating her ability to make critical decisions with incomplete information, trust her judgment when everything was uncertain, and take responsibility for choices that could have life or death consequences. 20 minutes into the exercise, a new element was introduced. The voice announced that a fellow intelligence officer in an adjacent room was struggling with a similar analysis and had requested her assistance. Sarah could help her colleague, but doing so would reduce the time available for her own assignment. Through a small window, she could see another candidate, Sergeant Rodriguez from the Army Special Forces, working frantically at his own desk. He appeared genuinely frustrated and overwhelmed by his assigned task. Sarah faced a choice: complete her own mission to the best of her ability, or risk her own success to help a fellow soldier. Sarah made her decision quickly. She spent 5 minutes helping Rodriguez understand a pattern in his documents that she had already identified in her own materials. Her assistance allowed him to refocus his analysis more effectively, but left her with limited time to complete her own briefing. When the 30 minutes ended, Sarah had prepared a concise but thorough analysis based on the most reliable information she could identify. Her briefing identified 3 legitimate threats while flagging 2 pieces of intelligence as likely fabrications designed to misdirect attention from real dangers. The next scenario transported her to what appeared to be a prisoner of war simulation. Sarah found herself in a small, windowless room with concrete walls and a single bright light. The temperature was uncomfortably warm, and a voice began asking questions about military procedures, unit locations, and classified information. Lieutenant Martinez, the voice said with a foreign accent that sounded vaguely Middle Eastern, "We know you have information that could save lives. American soldiers are walking into a trap, and only you can prevent it. Tell us about your unit's deployment plans." Sarah recognized this as a resistance training scenario, designed to test her ability to withstand interrogation without revealing sensitive information. She had undergone similar training before, but this felt more intense and realistic than previous exercises. The questioning continued for what felt like hours, though she suspected time was being manipulated to increase psychological pressure. The interrogators used a variety of techniques, appealing to her sense of duty to save American lives, creating false urgency, and gradually increasing the emotional pressure of the situation. "Your silence is killing your own soldiers," the voice insisted. "We already know about the operation. We just need you to confirm details that will help us minimize casualties on both sides." Sarah maintained her resistance, providing only name, rank, and serial number as required by military protocol. But the interrogators were skilled at psychological manipulation, gradually building a narrative that made cooperation seem like the moral choice rather than a betrayal. The breakthrough moment came when they introduced audio that supposedly captured American soldiers under attack, calling for help that would never come because Sarah refused to provide the information that could save them. The sounds were realistic enough to create genuine emotional distress, but Sarah forced herself to remember that this was a training scenario. After what felt like 6 hours but was probably closer to 2, the simulation ended. Sarah was exhausted, emotionally drained, and questioning some of her own responses to the scenarios. But she had maintained her integrity throughout the process, never revealing information that could compromise security even when pressured to believe that doing so would save lives. The final challenge of the psychological evaluation was perhaps the most difficult. Sarah found herself in a reproduction of a military courtroom, complete with judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. She was told that she was witnessing a court-martial proceeding for a fellow soldier accused of war crimes. The scenario was based on a real case that had occurred during recent military operations. A squad leader had made a split-second decision during combat that resulted in civilian casualties. The prosecution argued it was a war crime committed by a soldier who ignored rules of engagement. The defense claimed it was a tragic but justifiable decision made under extreme pressure to protect American lives. Sarah was told she had witnessed the incident and was being called to testify. Both sides had prepared compelling arguments, and her testimony could determine whether the accused soldier spent decades in prison or returned to his family. The case files presented evidence that supported both interpretations of events. Lieutenant Martinez, the simulated prosecutor, said, "Your testimony is crucial to ensuring justice is served. The families of the civilian victims deserve to know the truth about what happened." The defense attorney countered, "This soldier made an impossible choice in the heat of combat. Your testimony could destroy the life of a good man who was trying to protect his fellow soldiers." Sarah realized this scenario was testing her commitment to truth even when that truth might have painful consequences. She studied the evidence carefully, interviewed the role-playing witnesses, and considered every angle of the case before reaching her conclusion. Her testimony was based solely on the facts as she understood them from the evidence presented. She refused to be swayed by emotional appeals from either side, focusing instead on providing the most accurate account possible. Her approach acknowledged the tragedy of civilian deaths while recognizing the complex reality of combat decision-making. When the psychological evaluation finally ended, Sarah felt mentally and emotionally exhausted in ways that physical challenges never produced. Dr. Chen had created scenarios that forced her to confront the most difficult aspects of military service, making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information, maintaining integrity under extreme pressure, and accepting responsibility for choices with far-reaching consequences. As she emerged from the testing area, Sarah saw Lieutenant Colonel Harrison speaking with Dr. Chen near the evaluation center. Both were reviewing thick files that she assumed contained assessments of the candidate's performance. Harrison's expression was serious as he studied the documents, occasionally asking questions that she couldn't hear. Only 12 candidates remained from the original group of 47. The psychological evaluation had eliminated 6 more soldiers, including some who had performed well in the physical challenges. Sarah realized this assessment was designed to identify not just capable soldiers, but individuals who could handle the moral and psychological demands of the most sensitive military operations. The final phase of the assessment was scheduled for the evening, and Sarah suspected it would combine elements from all the previous challenges. As she prepared her equipment and tried to rest before the concluding test, she noticed Harrison approaching her position. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said quietly, "I've been following your progress throughout today's assessment. You've shown some interesting approaches to problem solving." Sarah came to attention. "Thank you, sir." Harrison studied her for a moment. "Tell me, what do you think this assessment is really evaluating? What qualities are we looking for in the candidates who succeed?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, I believe you're looking for soldiers who can adapt to any situation, make sound decisions under extreme pressure, and maintain their integrity regardless of the circumstances. Physical capabilities matter, but mental resilience and moral courage seem to be the determining factors." The colonel nodded slowly. "And do you believe you possess those qualities, Lieutenant?" "Sir, I believe today's challenges have tested me in ways I've never experienced. I've learned things about myself that I didn't know before. Whether I possess the qualities you're seeking is for you to determine, but I know I'm prepared to handle whatever responsibilities come with selection." Harrison's expression remained unreadable, but Sarah thought she detected a hint of approval in his eyes. "The final assessment begins in 2 hours. Rest well, Lieutenant. Tonight will determine whether today's performance was enough." As he walked away, Sarah realized that everything had been building toward whatever challenge awaited that evening. All the previous tests had been preparation for a final evaluation that would reveal whether she truly belonged among the most elite soldiers in the world. The final assessment began at midnight under a moonless sky. The 12 remaining candidates gathered in complete darkness, their equipment barely visible even at close range. Sarah could feel the tension among the group. Everyone understood that this was the moment that would determine their future. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison addressed them without using any artificial lighting, his voice carrying clearly through the still night air. For the final phase, you will operate individually. Each candidate has been assigned a mission that must be completed before dawn. Some of you will succeed. Others will discover that everything you've accomplished today wasn't quite enough. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Your missions are different, but equally challenging. You will receive your orders individually and have no contact with other candidates once you begin. This assessment will reveal whether you can operate at the highest level when completely alone, with no backup, no support, and no second chances. Sarah received her briefing packet from Major Williams. Inside was a single sheet of paper with coordinates, a photograph of a building, and a brief mission description. She was to infiltrate a mock enemy facility, retrieve specific intelligence without being detected, and return to a designated extraction point before sunrise. Any compromise of the mission would result in immediate elimination. The target building was located 5 miles away through dense forest terrain. Sarah would have to navigate in complete darkness, avoid multiple security patrols, penetrate a facility designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting, and escape without leaving any trace of her presence. As she studied the limited information provided, Sarah realized this mission was designed to test every skill she had demonstrated throughout the assessment. She would need the endurance from the ruck march, the tactical thinking from the combat simulation, the analytical skills from the psychological evaluation, and the moral courage to make difficult decisions alone. The building in the photograph appeared to be a 2-story structure with multiple windows, surrounded by open ground that offered little concealment. Intelligence indicated the presence of motion sensors, security cameras, and roving guards with night vision equipment. The target documents were reportedly located in a second-floor office that could only be accessed through the main building. Sarah began her approach by studying the terrain between her starting position and the target. The 5-mile route took her through varying landscapes, dense forest that provided excellent concealment but slowed movement, open fields that required careful timing to cross without detection, and, finally, the cleared area around the target building itself. Her smaller size proved advantageous during the approach. She could move through dense underbrush that would have snagged larger soldiers, and her lighter weight allowed her to cross areas of loose ground without creating noise that might alert security patrols. Sarah had learned to use her physical characteristics as tactical advantages rather than limitations. 3 miles into the approach, she encountered the first security patrol. 2 instructors equipped with night vision goggles were conducting a methodical search of the forest between her position and the target. Sarah could hear their quiet conversation as they moved through the trees, checking potential hiding spots and routes that candidates might use. Rather than trying to avoid them entirely, Sarah chose a more aggressive approach. She shadowed the patrol for nearly a kilometer, learning their movement patterns, communication procedures, and areas of focus. When they paused to radio their position to a central command post, she was close enough to hear their entire conversation. The information revealed additional security measures around the target building that hadn't been mentioned in her briefing. Motion-activated lights covered the northern and eastern approaches, and a 3rd patrol was positioned near the extraction point. Sarah realized she was being tested on her ability to gather intelligence and adapt her plan based on changing circumstances. Her approach to the building itself required innovative thinking. The obvious routes were heavily monitored, and the open ground around the structure offered no concealment. But Sarah noticed something the security plan had overlooked: a drainage ditch that ran along the western side of the building, designed to carry rainwater away from the foundation. The ditch was barely wide enough for her small frame and filled with cold, muddy water that soaked through her uniform. But it allowed her to reach the building's foundation completely undetected. From there, she faced the challenge of reaching the second-floor office without triggering any of the internal security systems. Sarah's rock climbing experience proved crucial for this phase of the mission. Instead of using the building's internal staircase, which would certainly be monitored, she scaled the exterior wall using window frames and architectural features as handholds. Her approach required precise movements and absolute silence, but it bypassed the internal security entirely. The target office was locked, but Sarah had prepared for this possibility. Her military intelligence training included basic lockpicking skills, though she had never used them in a real operation before tonight. Working by feel in complete darkness, she carefully manipulated the lock mechanism until she heard the quiet click of success. Inside the office, Sarah faced her most challenging task. The intelligence documents were mixed in with dozens of other papers scattered across a desk and filing cabinets. She had to identify the correct materials using only a small red-filtered flashlight that wouldn't trigger night vision sensors. Each document had to be photographed with a special camera that left no trace of access. As she worked through the papers, Sarah discovered that some of them contained information that seemed too sensitive for a training exercise. References to real military operations, actual unit designations, and classified communication procedures suggested this might be more than just a simulation. The realization that she might be handling genuine intelligence created an ethical dilemma. Was this part of the test, or had she stumbled into a real operational security situation? Sarah decided to photograph everything that matched her mission parameters while making mental notes about the unusual materials for later discussion with her superiors. Her escape from the building required even more careful planning than her entry. The security patrols had changed their patterns while she was inside, and new motion sensors had been activated in areas that were previously unmonitored. Sarah had to adapt her route in real time, using information gathered during her approach phase to find alternative paths. The journey back to the extraction point tested every aspect of her endurance and determination. She had been operating for over 18 hours with minimal rest, carrying equipment through challenging terrain, and maintaining constant alertness to avoid detection. Her smaller size, which had been questioned at the beginning of the assessment, now allowed her to move through areas where larger soldiers would have been impossible to conceal. As dawn approached, Sarah reached the designated extraction point with 40 minutes to spare. She had successfully completed her mission without compromising security, gathering additional intelligence beyond her original requirements, and demonstrating skills that integrated everything learned throughout the assessment. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was waiting at the extraction point with Dr. Chen and Major Williams. As Sarah emerged from the forest, she could see them conferring quietly while reviewing files and radio communications. The expressions on their faces suggested that her performance had exceeded their expectations in some way. "Mission report, Lieutenant Martinez," Harrison said as she approached. Sarah provided a concise briefing covering her approach route, security observations, target penetration, intelligence gathered, and extraction procedures. She also mentioned the unusual nature of some documents she had encountered, suggesting they might require special handling procedures. Harrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. "Lieutenant, the documents you photographed were indeed real intelligence materials. This facility serves as a testing ground for security procedures, but it also houses genuine classified information. Your recognition of this situation and your decision to handle it appropriately demonstrates the kind of judgment we require for our operations." Dr. Chen stepped forward with what appeared to be a final evaluation form. "Your psychological profile shows remarkable resilience under pressure, strong moral courage, and the ability to make sound decisions when operating independently. These qualities are essential for the work Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's unit performs." Major Williams added, "Your physical performance exceeded expectations, but, more importantly, you demonstrated innovative thinking and tactical adaptability that set you apart from other candidates. You turned apparent disadvantages into operational advantages consistently throughout the assessment." Harrison studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking. "Lieutenant Martinez, your performance today has been exceptional. You've demonstrated that effectiveness in special operations isn't determined by physical size or conventional military thinking. It's about intelligence, adaptability, courage, and the ability to succeed when everything else fails." He paused, and Sarah noticed him reaching for something attached to his uniform. "Which brings us to the significance of this moment. Throughout your career, you've been underestimated because of your appearance. People made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that have nothing to do with your actual skills or determination." Harrison removed a patch from his pocket, the distinctive insignia of his elite unit. Sarah recognized it immediately as one of the most respected symbols in the special operations community, worn only by soldiers who had proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances. Today, Lieutenant Martinez, you've earned the right to wear this patch. But, more than that, you've demonstrated that the most important qualities of an elite warrior can't be measured in inches or pounds. They're measured in heart, mind, and spirit. As he handed her the patch, Harrison smiled for the first time since the assessment began. Welcome to the unit, Lieutenant. Your real training starts next week. Sarah held the patch in her hands, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The small piece of fabric symbolized recognition that her worth as a soldier wasn't determined by other people's preconceptions, but by her own actions and capabilities. Around them, the sun was beginning to rise over the testing facility. Of the 47 candidates who had started the assessment, only 3 had successfully completed all phases. Sarah was the smallest soldier in the group, but she was also one of the most capable. As she prepared to attach the patch to her uniform, Sarah thought about all the people who had doubted her abilities over the years. The drill sergeants who questioned her presence, the fellow soldiers who called her pocket soldier, and the countless others who assumed size equaled strength. But she also thought about her father, who had taught her that respect was earned through actions. About the teammates who had learned to trust her judgment. And about Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had seen past appearances to recognize the warrior beneath. The patch said everything about who she really was and what she had accomplished. It was proof that determination and skill mattered more than assumptions, that the heart of a warrior could beat just as strongly in a small frame as in a large one. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez attached the patch to her uniform with pride, knowing she had earned every thread through her actions, her choices, and her refusal to let anyone else define her limitations. The smirk of doubt had been replaced by the respect of peers and the recognition she had always deserved.